Hi, everybody.
Like we've got people popping in.
Happy Wednesday, everybody.
Well, it looks like it's 11 o'clock, so I think we can get going if that sounds good. Hello, everybody, and welcome to May. I can't believe it. 2025 and National Correct Your Posture Month, which I thought was interesting. Asparagus Month, which who knew, and American Indian Month. So welcome to all the folks who love asparagus and need to correct their posture and all of our American Indian friends out there. So excited that you are here with us today and I hope that you're looking forward to this session as much as I do, because we have such wonderful people here that are ready to share their insights and knowledge and expertise with us today on what does it mean to recruit talent and residents to our communities, and how does that impact workforce and businesses. So it's an important topic, and it's something that we should all be really focusing on. How do we grow our communities and keep people there so that we have thriving businesses and communities? So you really do have some wonderful people to listen to today, some folks that I really respect and admire and call friends. So I'm really looking forward to hearing what they have to say today. My name is Jessica Miller, and I'm the Director of Workforce Strategy for the Minnesota Department of Employment and Economic Development. And like I said, we're really happy to have you with us today. If you are new here, thank you so much for joining us. If you're returning, thank you for coming back. Our team of consultants work regionally, which means that each consultant will have a slightly different way that they do their work based on the region that they are supporting and the employers that they're working with within those regions. But the common core ways that we work with employers and support them are identified here on this slide. We work with you to identify gaps in your current strategies, ensure that you're connected with your local, regional, and state workforce partners, and we assist you in building strategies that will help you retain and attract your workforce. Our consultation process is rooted and informed by data and is developed specifically with your company's needs and goals in mind. We serve as your guide through this process and convene workforce partners for support, share training and grant opportunities, and continually check in to ensure progress is being made and assist in making adjustments along the way. When you work with us, you are automatically connected to a wide network of people and partners who work collaboratively for the success of our state, our regions, our communities, so that your business and our workforce can thrive. We do not do this work alone. It takes many people to bring success to this effort, and a lot of those people are going to be in the audience with us today. You'll see on this next slide that we have the remainder of the sessions for the year up and available for registration. You spoke, we listened. We really wanted to incorporate your feedback into these topics, and we'll continue to weave your needs throughout our sessions for the rest of the year. So please, I really do want to encourage you to fill out the evaluation at the end of our time here together today. We'll get that link popped into the chat throughout our time, but know that we really do listen to what you have to say, and any ideas and needs that you have as they're coming, we're moving through this year as quickly as we are, let us know, because we're always open to adding sessions too if we need to respond to an immediate need. As always, I would love to take a moment to encourage you to fill out or to be engaged in the chat today. We really do want to continue to utilize this chat feature. Please ask questions, answer questions, interact with our guests, our consultants, the partners, and each other. We really want to build upon this culture and community that we've started here, and we welcome your engagement. As always, these webinars are recorded. You'll see that bright red dot in the upper left-hand corner. They're available to view at any time via YouTube, as well as our Career Force MN website, where you'll also find recordings of and resources of previous sessions as well. So to kick things off, in the chat, if you want to let us know who you are, where you work, what you want to learn more about today, we will be going through those questions as we go through the session so that we can answer those questions as we go. We have a packed agenda with speakers who have dedicated their careers to being change makers and culture shakers, and I'm really, really excited for you to meet them. So without further ado, it is my privilege to introduce you to James Whirlwind Soldier, our Northwest Workforce Strategy Consultant. James, take it away.
Thanks, Jessica. And thanks to all the rest of the Workforce Strategy team for helping us put all this together. It's always great to work with this team of really, really great people. So for today, right? Well, we know that the 21st century has been pretty eventful so far. I think we can all agree on that. We see our communities changing, we see our populations changing. Because we see our populations changing, we see our workforce and how we reach our workforce changing also. We're seeing more and more often businesses getting involved with areas that maybe they wouldn't traditionally be involved in, such as childcare, housing, and like today, we're going to talk about resident recruiting. We have gathered a group of professionals that work in this resident recruiting space to talk about this topic, and specifically the why and the how we as employers can leverage this resident recruitment strategy to engage a better workforce. So thank you all so much for coming today. Let's go through a quick agenda here so we know what's coming, and then we'll move on to the conversation. So again, thank you, Jessica, for introducing us and introducing the topic. We're reviewing the agenda right now. After that, I'm going to hand it over to Anthony Schaffhauser, who's going to do a quick little summary of some of the data that helps inform resident recruitment as an effective business strategy. Then, of course, we'll introduce our esteemed panelists, and we'll jump right into that panel discussion. After that, at about 12 o'clock, we'll do a quick little panel wrap-up. And we'll pass it on to Della Ludwig, who will lead us into the Unplugged session, which will last from noon till 12:30. At that time, please turn on your microphones, turn on your cameras, and ask questions directly to our panelists. Otherwise, you can go ahead and throw them in the chat or communicate them to us in one way or another, and we'll make sure that they get asked when that time comes. And so let's go ahead and introduce our great panelists. So panelists, I did shorten some of the biographies a little bit because you're stacked, right? You're all stacked with experience and education and knowledge and so on and so forth. So we're just going to go with the 30,000-foot view. I'm going to definitely invite all of our attendees to jump onto LinkedIn, check out the credentials, the bona fides. These people are the real deal, and we're really happy to have them here today. So starting off, we have Kelly Ash. Kelly's the senior researcher at the Center for Rural Policy and Development. Kelly's research is focused on a broad range of rural development topics, such as workforce shortages, housing, and migration patterns. He also enjoys busting myths related to the rural narrative. Kelly is also an adjunct faculty member of the Humphrey School of Public Affairs, where he teaches rural planning and policy. Now let's move to Ben Winchester. Ben is trained as a rural sociologist and works for the University of Minnesota Extension. His research, he conducts applied research on economic, social, and demographic topics, surrounding a theme of rewriting the rural narrative. He recently received an International Rural Renewal Research Prize in 2021 for his work. He was a founding employee at the Center for Small Towns, an outreach program at the University of Minnesota Morris, and specializes in community development, demographic analysis, data visualization, and moving communities away from anecdata. Anecdata, that's a great word. Next, our next two panelists for the discussion. First off is Adam Genero. I'm sure I'm pronouncing your last name wrong, Adam. I apologize for that. Adam is the Senior Director of Talent Solutions for Centricare, where he leads a team of over 60 employees across talent solutions and volunteer services. Since September of 2024, he has been driving strategic efforts in recruiting, sourcing, recruitment marketing, career navigation, volunteering, contract staffing, and workforce development. Adam has been working to retain and attract top talent into Centricare since 2014. Is that right, Adam? Awesome. Adam holds an MBA from the University of St. Mary and a bachelor's degree in sport and recreation management from the University of Minnesota Crookston. Last but not least, Mr. Eric Osberg. Eric, we're so happy to have you here. Eric is the Rural Rebound Initiative Coordinator for Otter Tail County. Eric is also the owner and operator of Whiskey Creek Media and has been doing so for 14 years. Prior to his current role, Eric worked as a sports reporter and served in finance and banking. He holds a Bachelor of Arts degree in communication from Hamline University, and more recently, Eric has decided to run for office. But today he joins us in his capacity as a resident recruiter, and I hope we get a little bit of Eric the coach also during our conversation today. So Eric, thanks for having us, or thanks for coming, joining us today. I look forward to learning from you. But before we do any of that, like we like to always do, let's talk a little bit about the data. So to do that, we brought in Deed's labor market analyst and senior research analyst for the Northwest region, as Anthony Schaffhauser. We know him, we love him. Anthony, thanks so much for being here. Anthony served as interim and statewide director of healthcare workforce development for Health Force Minnesota, and as interim dean of enrollment and dean of student access for Minnesota State Community and Technical College before returning to Deed. Anthony has a Bachelor of Arts in Political Economy from Tulane University and a Master's of Science in Public Policy Analysis at the University of Rochester. And during his time at Tulane, Anthony also served as president of the Water Skiing Club. So glad to have you, Anthony. So Anthony, I know this is one of the things we like to do right away is talk about the data. So I'm going to throw it to you if that works for you.
You bet, James. Thank you. Let me just hit the present button here, and my slide should come up here. So I'm going to talk about the population dynamics and what the data tells us about that to give us an overview to set things up for the panelists, because as a panelist, you don't have time in your question answers to throw up data and get a visualization of that. So hopefully this will help. So the first slide here is just the population change in Minnesota. And there's a lot going on here, so let me explain it a little bit. I'm showing three components of population change, but there's really only two. It's just that it's interesting to look at international net migration and domestic net migration separately. So how does the population grow? Well, there's only two ways. You can have more births than deaths, or you can have more people moving in than moving out. So, I mean, since we're not single-celled entities that can divide like an amoeba or something, that's it. That's how you grow the population. So looking at this then, I'm looking at international net migration and domestic net migration separately. International net migration is another word for that is just immigration. But it's people moving out of the country, it's people moving into the country minus people moving out of the country. And domestic net migration is people moving from other states, in this case, minus the people moving to other states. And so that's what we've got here shown on the graph. And what you see is an interesting pattern here before the pandemic. International net migration was declining, and domestic migration was both up and down. So just focusing in on the 2016 to 2019 time period there, you can see that trend. Now, when you get past the pandemic to the 4 years after the pandemic, you can see that international net migration was trending up, and domestic net migration took a pretty big hit. It's basically was the most negative it had been in 2022 in this whole decade, but then it started trending less negative in 2023 and 2024. So that's the statewide look. And of course, different areas of the state are going to have a different pattern. And I'm going to show that a little bit by just showing Greater Minnesota. But if you guys are interested in these data for like your county or a set of counties or a region or something like that, let me know. I've got the whole Excel file built, so I can just change things pretty quickly. Anyway, so now with Greater Minnesota, it's like statewide in the sense that international migration was declining before the pandemic, but it's different in the fact that domestic migration was up in 2014 and 2015, or up. It started going up compared to 2014 to 15, even prior to the pandemic. So you're looking at 2017, 2018, and 2019. All three of those had more domestic net migration than the years prior. The other thing that's interesting here is coming out of the pandemic, the natural increase was much lower in Greater Minnesota than it was before the pandemic. So this is more so due to more deaths than it was due to fewer births, but there were also fewer births. So net migration, though, was more than double what it was before the pandemic. So in both international and domestic, net migration increased to their highest levels of the decade in the pandemic recovery. So it's quite a significant change in trend there for Greater Minnesota. And so as you might imagine, if we're looking at Minnesota and it's showing declining domestic net migration, and you're looking at Greater Minnesota, it's showing increasing domestic net migration, well, the difference must be in the Twin Cities, and it is. So in contrast, the Twin Cities domestic migration was at the lowest levels of the decade coming out of the pandemic, with the population growth was driven by increased international net migration in the Twin Cities. Okay, so what does all that mean for the workforce? Well, in order to get an idea of the impact on, I'm sorry, I skipped showing a couple slides here. Let me go back. Here's Greater Minnesota, and you can see the increase in the net migration in Greater Minnesota, and you can see that the natural increase, the births minus deaths, was much smaller. And here's the Twin Cities, and you can see that the domestic net migration was declining after the pandemic, and that the growth was really driven by international net migration. Sorry to skip that there. Okay, so anyway, now to the impact on the workforce. So we can get an idea of what's happening with the working age population and net migration by looking at the change in population for those 3 years older, 3 years later. Because again, there's only so many ways that the population can increase, and one is from births and one is from net migration. Now, this does gonna underestimate a little bit because there are some deaths, and I don't have that by age. But the death rate is pretty small for this population, the working age population. For example, the death rate for Minnesota's age 40 to 64 was 0.3%, and for 20 to 39, it was 0.1%. So what do we have then? We show that in Minnesota, from 2020 to 2023, there was some growth from those 3 years from birth to 11 years old, all the way up to 0 to 14 then in 2023. And then all the rest of the age groups in that working age, I have it quoted here because it's a traditional working age. We have had been experiencing some increases in labor force participation among those 65 and over. So working age is probably, maybe that definition is going to get extended at some point with that. But you can see that the least decrease here statewide is in the 22 to 51, then turning 25 to 54. And that has the highest labor force participation rate. So if you look at the other groups, it's a little lower. So overall, the impact, because there was less of a loss from net migration in the 25 to 54 group, that actually helped to retain more of those folks within Minnesota. Now, what about Greater Minnesota? We've already seen that there is a difference. How does the working age population play out there? Well, there's actually workforce gains from net migration in greater Minnesota, except in the 55 to 64 group. So it's really interesting that even this 15 to 24 group gained a little bit from net migration. This is contrary to a long prior trend. Everyone has heard about the brain drain and young people leaving rural areas. When we look at the period that we have the data for so far past the pandemic, this isn't the case. And this has really been all of this gain in the workforce has really been contributed to greatly by some of the metropolitan statistical areas in greater Minnesota, Rochester, St. Cloud, Moorhead, those places. Those are the bigger cities in greater Minnesota, but also some of the micropolitan statistical areas in greater Minnesota that are slightly smaller, but are still regional centers. And then in contrast, the most rural areas generally speaking, have declining population or slower growth than the MSAs and the micro SAs. So that's kind of the pattern. Like I said, if you guys need something for a different area, just feel free to contact me. So what's the conclusion on the trends here? Well, for Minnesota statewide, we saw that the international net migration recovered and increased coming out of the pandemic. You see that the population growth is from the natural increase and the international net migration. The domestic migration statewide is not a driver of population growth. You can see that the domestic net migration has been negative coming out of the pandemic, but has become less negative as we get further away from the pandemic. So the working age population declined due to net migration, but the age 0 to 14 increased statewide. Now, in contrast, greater Minnesota shows both international and domestic net migration increase since the pandemic. The increased deaths pulled down the natural increase since the pandemic. Nearly all the population growth in greater Minnesota is from net migration. Net migration also increased the working age population in greater Minnesota, in contrast to statewide in the Twin Cities. And in the Twin Cities, domestic migration was much lower coming out of the pandemic. Population growth, again, driven by international migration for the Twin Cities. And the working age population declines a bit more than statewide after the pandemic. So it's in the Twin Cities where that domestic migration, net domestic outmigration really is occurring to a greater extent. So the bottom line of all this is that resident recruiting is more important for greater Minnesota, and it's actually an imperative for rural areas with an older population. And the reason that this is because, as you can see in the Twin Cities area, which since the majority of the population's in the Twin Cities area in Minnesota, that's what's influencing Minnesota so much. The natural increase, the births minus the deaths, are a huge driver of population change. And as the share of the population in an area ages and gets to be past the childbearing years, the potential to increase birth rates is much lower. So really, for the most rural areas especially, you need to rely on net migration, people moving into the area in order to grow the population. And I will also mention, though, that if international net migration decreases, that domestic net migration will also become more important to the Twin Cities area, because that's really what was driving population growth in the Twin Cities was the international net migration. So that's what I have. Hope that helps set the stage here.
Thank you, Anthony. Thank you very much. I'm going to go ahead and take over presentation here. Great data. I know we're going to talk a little bit about that as we go in. We've got some experts on that topic, but really, this is an imperative. We threw the county profiles from the DEED website onto our chat. take a look at it. Take a look at your own county and check out what your populations look like there, and see what that increase and decrease looks like. Anthony, you talked about a little bit of a scope there, and definitely in the Northwest region, you can see that with regard to having Moorhead at the same time. Some of those higher up Northwest counties, which are seeing more of a decline than others. So thank you again. But I think it's time to jump to our panel discussion. But before we do that, I just wanted to let everybody know that there are a number of organizations that are doing this good work right now. Here are a few on the screen. I know I'm missing some great ones. We'll make sure and get those to you. Where Two Rivers meet. Thank you, Shayla. Otherwise, we'll get all that communicated. But you're not alone in this. If you're looking at dipping your toe into this world, there are a ton of different resources and people available to help out. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into our panel discussion. I'm going to stop sharing here so we can just get right into it and talk. So the first question I would like to direct towards Ben, if that would work for you, sir. So Ben, we're talking about resident recruitment. Now, what does that actually mean, and how did we arrive at that term?
Yeah, good question. For us, it's yet another wave of economic development. Steve Deller at the University of Wisconsin talks about we went through 4 waves of economic development, really, and that is what are the strategies we have to use to help encourage jobs, and then that leads to potentially migration. And the first wave was industrial recruitment, and that's, we bring in the business, and then the only reason people are going to move here is they have a job here, right? That's the motivation for migration. But then that's kind of years gone by. Now we've worked more with small business and entrepreneurship in wave 2, and wave 3 of economic development was really around clusters. So Minnesota, we've got a strong medical industry and some infotech and data centers. So, but more recently now it's resident recruitment. And I'll say we arrived at this term because it wasn't enough to use the warm body approach to job, recruitment. Like, hey, we need to fill our jobs. Like, yeah, you're going to lead to retention issues at that point. And at the same time, we do newcomer studies. So you had heard Anthony talk about the brain drain, and yes, it's true. Their kids want to leave. They're going to leave. What they need to know is they have a place to come back to that's more than viable for them. So, what kind of narrative is being told when we have indicators like the population's decline? Right. So we have looked at more studies at the household level, and we examine who is currently moving in. And one of the questions that we ask is, did you move into your community because you had a job or a job offer in that town? And that number has been well below 50% for over 20 years, which again gets at the notion that why are people moving here, right? Do they move here because they have the job, or they have to find a job eventually? And it is totally, people are trying to achieve a life-work balance. It is not even work life, because that implies work is first. So now we arrive at the situation where in a tight labor market, as we know in Minnesota, we have an extremely tight labor market. Labor's got power to choose wherever they want to go. What's going to differentiate one place from another? It is literally everything that happens to them when they leave that job floor. And they learn about the employer, they learn about the skills, they learn about the pay and benefits, but now they leave that place, they need to know what their life is going to be like. This is resident recruitment, and it works at a level above industrial recruitment. It complements this, and it helps at a regional level, because as you know, we work regionally. You heard about this forever, right? Since the year I was born, pretty much. Like, we need to work regionally, but how well do we? That's a good question. This is the real question. We don't live in our jurisdictions. We don't live in our cities. We don't live in our counties. We don't hit the county line and turn, right? But we're trying to create jobs here. But I'll say the number one confounding variable for resident recruitment is housing. Your population in rural communities is going down because we are filled with more and more with people that are passing away, the spouses, one household at a time. So it's hard to literally welcome in new people when there's nowhere for them to live. So this is where your narrative matters. If you truly believe rural communities are dying, then you should have homes anywhere. Labor should be able to find any job they want. So, but on the other hand, if you truly believe you have a labor shortage, then you're doing something wrong. We're not paying enough. My community is not attractive enough. If you don't notice that it's virtually impossible to find a home to buy. So we do say the turnkey. You want to help people find a home as a part of resident recruitment. It's not just going to be in Hancock. It could be in the entire region of Western Minnesota that people will live in. So these are kind of the concepts we talk about. It's really the coordinated economic, community development, and tourism activities across the region, as Eric will tell you about. I mean, tourism matters. Tourism assets aren't just for the tourists, they're for your residents, and they are a key retention activity too. So I'll just say that here in Minnesota, we have a very strong rural development industry. We're all part of this. Not other states have this. We currently meet every month with all these groups that do resident recruitment, Tuesdays at 11 a.m. We're missing this month because of fishing. But starting, if you're interested in joining these meetings, let us know. And so that's just a little bit of kind of how we arrived at that term. We're trying to own the term, honestly. There's a lot of different words for it. It can be around placemaking or space making or talent recruitment. I know Adam's on here, so there's a lot of different terminology around this. And we honestly just tried to arrive at a term we could all understand. And we just called it resident recruitment. So there's a little background for it.
Thank you. Well, let's continue this background search. So kind of what you described, and I don't think you use these specific words, but you described this strategy as being relatively unique, fresh, that sort of thing. You called it the fourth wave, which kind of economic development, which kind of it also seems to imply kind of like a certain newness to it, right? And we can talk about Eric's position. Eric, we're going to get to you about this in a second, about how his position at Ottertail is wholly unique and new and exciting. But Ben, I want to direct this question to you. So looking at this, how does resident recruitment differ from what I would consider to be, maybe this is the wrong term, but more traditional economic development tools?
Yeah, so I mean, the key point here is the regionality of everyday life. And right now, most of our jurisdictions are incentivized to create jobs in my city or in my county without a recognition that we live in the middle of everywhere. We live in these vast regions that are 5-7 counties wide. We shop and eat and play and recreate. More Minnesotans today leave their home county for work than stay. 52% of Minnesotans leave their county to work every day. So then again, we have these grants at the federal, state level that we're trying to incentivize our places. But that's not how people live. And we do know we've got placer data that tell our cell phone data that shows how big of a region people live in. And it's pretty massive. So when we're trying to do economic development traditionally, it's very place-based, but that's not how our actual residents live. So when we're going to recruit people, you've got to know what's going on in your entire region. Just knowing what's going on in your town is not enough. The parochialism around my jurisdiction has to have it all went away 100 years ago.
Yeah. Kelly, do you have anything to add to that answer?
No. I think Ben did a pretty good job, so I'll leave it there.
Well, I'm gonna ask you the next question then. So Ben talked about that regionality, how important that is. But I've heard you speak before about resident recruitment needing to be a statewide support system. How does that look, and why does it have to be a statewide support system? And I know you're better in agreement.
Yep. So let's start with that second question of why. And, as Anthony laid out, population change in Minnesota has been largely driven by having more births than deaths, as well as positive international immigration. Domestic migration, our state is pretty bad at. And if you connect the state demographer's projections looking forward, they'll say in 2040, the entire state of Minnesota will have more deaths than births. So that main primary driver of positive population gain is going to go away. We're going to see negative population due to having more deaths than births. So as a state demographer says, we are going to be completely reliant in our ability to have migration into our state, either international or domestic. So no matter what, the state of Minnesota is going to have to face this question of, unless they want to start passing policies where it's, statewide week of sex, week or whatever policy, or try and get a whole bunch of Catholics into our state. It's just not going to happen, right? And so we are going to be much more reliant on migration. And as a state, we need to figure out what that is. Now, in our rural areas in greater Minnesota, we already have counties that are experiencing more deaths than births. And a lot of counties are actually just starting to cross that line where they're having more deaths than births, which means they're much more reliant on migration. Luckily, as Anthony pointed out, and a lot of other data has shown, that our migration trends have turned around. And I think largely attributed to the fact that since you're having more deaths, and I know this is kind of a dark theme, right? But has also opened up a lot more housing. And so I think that has been contributing to our ability to attract more residents into our rural areas. So that's a long-winded answer to say we're going to have to face this. Rural areas are facing it now. So why not, as a state, do we not just start saying, all right, rural areas, we're going to start piloting this stuff in your areas because you're already facing it. And no matter what, as a state, we need to figure this out over the next decade. That's why I kind of feel like it's a statewide issue. The second thing I'll say is I think there's a more I was presenting in front of the Minnesota Association of Development Organizations yesterday. And one of the one of the organizations brought up a question of like, look, we see this resident recruitment stuff kind of pop up and peter out in our communities. And that is probably to be expected for a couple of reasons. As Ben has talked about, this is a very new thing. Even though these trends have been going for a while, we've known this day was coming. We're just starting, as economic developers and workforce development folks, starting to come to this realization. I think there's a lot of uncomfortable conversations that need to be had, such as what you brought up, James, that we need to talk about housing, childcare, school districts, natural amenities. Like these need to be now part of the workforce development conversation. And at a local community side, that's a big risk. Like that's a hard thing for a local city, local EDA to kind of take on and convince their community. But if you have state support, grants that would come in and help essentially buffer that risk they're going to take on some of these new strategies that haven't been tried before, it's going to have to be from the state to really help bolster those efforts. So that's why I think it's a pretty important to have a statewide support. So you asked the question, then what does that look like? I think grants, I think funding, I think shared resources, particularly with our tourism at the statewide level. What data do they have supporting the University of Minnesota Extension? What data do they have? How do we support these programs to come into our rural areas and help introduce these ideas and get everybody to start collaborating together? I think are some of the key ways that we can do that.
I start seeing this intentionality that we're talking about, where people are starting to dip their toe, and I've probably seen that for at least a year now, even in that childcare and housing area, where they recognize that they have to be part of that. And for another time, let's argue or discuss if that's Adam Smith's invisible hand, and I literally mean that as a question. Like, does that fit that category? But we'll talk about that some other time. So an example of that intentionality, I would say, falls into your circle of the Venn diagram, Eric. You were hired specifically for a role within this space, which is wholly unique. What is your job actually? What are they paying you for? And can you just talk a little bit about that, about how you connect with Otter Tail County, and how you work regionally as opposed to town centric?
Yeah, for sure. My job is to put Otter Tail County on the map. If somebody's gonna move here, if somebody's gonna eventually live and work here, they have to know we exist, number one, right? So my job is to put Otter Tail County on the map. Ultimately, it's to recruit workforce as well. And so my role is based. The reason it's called, I owe everything to Ben. So I love being here with Ben, because my role wouldn't exist without Ben's research, right? And so Rural Rebound Initiative Coordinator is directly tied into Ben's research. And so Kelly touched on it a little bit. The pop up and fizzle out, maybe it was Kelly or James, but the pop up and fizzle out of these efforts. We've been at this since 2017, and so I don't, maybe we'll fizzle out this afternoon, but we've been at this for a while. And the reason I believe that we've had some staying power is because it's a daily thing. It's not a here's some money, here's an incentive, here's a thing. It's back again to what Ben talks about, is writing the rural narrative. Every single day, 365, my job is to highlight the good things that are happening in Otter Tail County organically, right? The reasons somebody might want to live here, whether it's a sunset over a lake, or whether it's a path at a park, or whether it's a cool job, or whatever it is, a great school. So my job is to document the good things that are happening in Otter Tail County and then broadcast them to the world every single day of the week, multiple times a day. We are flooding the zone with good, and and hopefully we can break through some of the noise and somebody says, oh, Otter Tail County, that doesn't seem so bad there, right? So So, and then I think Ben touched on it earlier, and maybe it was you too, James. We use tourism as the first date, right? So, and Kelly mentioned, state level. The reasons that somebody lives here are the same reasons they would come on vacation here. And so rather than saying this is tourism over here and this is economic development over here, we've combined the two and we've just integrated the live work messaging into our visit messaging. And we've got a drum that we can beat on a daily basis, and then others can start to march to the beat of that drum, and we change hopefully the narrative or perceptions of what life and opportunity is like in Otter Tail County.
Eric, it's really fun to talk to you about this because I don't want to sound too corny, but you really have a good way of bringing joy into this work. And so before I move over to Adam and kind of go on a more microcosmic level of how this work happens, you've talked to me before about the two narratives. You've talked about self-talk. You've talked about mindset, and flipping that switch to change the way you're thinking. I think that's a good example of that joy that comes with this work. Can you talk a little bit about that as a resident recruiter and as somebody who's kind of cheerleading and flag waving for your community?
For sure. And again, this goes back to Ben. Ben, first time I ever heard Ben present, he said, nobody's going to move to your town out of pity. They're not coming to the rescue to fix all your problems, right? And so when I talk about the two narratives, there's a narrative that the outside world has of rural places, and then there's the narrative that we have internally about ourselves, right? Our self-talk. And I've been in meetings where I've said, okay, this isn't the meeting where we're going to talk about everything that's wrong with our community. This is the meeting where we're going to talk about it with it. And about 15 minutes in, somebody starts to talk about what's wrong with the community. I'm like, whoa, wait a minute. That's a different meeting for a different day. There are problems we need to solve. We have smarter people than I working on housing and childcare and all that stuff, right? But the analogy, James, that I use is, imagine you were a football coach at a college, right? And your job is to recruit players. And so you have the star quarterback on your campus and you sat in your chair and you said, well, we used to be good, but our running back, he tore his ACL, and our defensive coordinator, he left, and our fan base doesn't really care anymore, and our facilities are starting to crumble. So do you want to play football here? The answer is no. So you got so the joy that so if one of our rules in the office, one of the rules on the team is if we're not having fun, we're doing it wrong. Whatever this looks like, whatever our messaging looks like, if it isn't fun while we're in the process of it, it's not going to look and sound and feel fun on the other end. So you're absolutely right. You have to bring joy. And the last thing I would say about it is, for who we are right now, not who we used to be, not what we could have been, but who we have to celebrate our regions, who we are right now. And I guess I got one more thing. It is a collaborative effort. In Otter Tail County, we have a collaborative. It's called Otter Tail Lakes Country. It's a 501c6 or 3 or whatever, right? There's private funding mechanisms that fuel the machine that help us broadcast the good stuff to the world.
Oh, that's beautiful. Adam, I'd like to jump to you next, if that's okay. Kind of, again, we're going to talk about broadcasting that story a little bit. So, Eric talked about this having to be a daily thing, right? We talked about rewriting that rural narrative. We talked about how community, right, and developing a healthy community can impact workforce development. But let's turn it on its head a little bit. How does workforce development impact community? So how could developing that workforce impact community and maybe even have a positive influence on resident recruiting?
Yeah, thanks, James. When we think about recruitment, probably the most, and I think Benson said this the best, is that when we talk about terminologies, we probably use different terms for different purposes, right? So when we say recruitment, most people think of, oh, I got to go outward and bring in. Well, recruitment can simply be part of retention. And so at CentraCare, we kind of think of recruitment both as bringing in, but retaining. And so you talk about workforce development, and in its simplest form, workforce development is really just the educating, the promoting, and the preparing our communities to join the workforce in a specific industry or career pathway. So the impact of workforce development really is about retaining and acquiring workforce eligible individuals to stay in our communities, but also if we're out and about or if we're promoting our positions, to drive people into our communities. What we've seen, and going on a little tangent here, what we've seen is that people come to our communities for two purposes. One, they have a connection. They had family members here. They grew up here and they left and they came back. We saw the rates of people leaving, but people also are coming back. Maybe not right away, maybe 10 years later. And so workforce development really helps set the stage of, why are you coming back to our community? Is it because you have a connection and then you're going to find a job? Or is it there's a job opportunity that I've been wanting to seek, and I vacation in Minnesota and I really want to get an opportunity to grow my career. So workforce development helps us build that pathway for individuals to come into our communities or to stay in our communities to grow in their career projections.
Thank you. So you're doing the work. I wanted to direct the next question to Kelly, if that's okay. Just because, again, I can't believe we're running out of time already. And Eric, that's only 2 sports analogies so far. I'm kind of disappointed in that. So we'll see what happens. You have 15 minutes. But Kelly, what should a business do if they want to start getting involved with resident recruiting?
Yeah, a couple things. And I think we've seen really good examples of employers really sticking their neck out on some of this stuff. A lot of these folks have been feeling it for quite a while now. I noticed in the participant list and the people that are joining us, I see a lot of folks that are in elder care organizations and services and things like that. They've been feeling this struggle for a long time, nursing homes, healthcare, but even manufacturing and things like that. I would say the key thing, one, is what I talked about before and what all of us have been talking about is that this is a bit of uncomfortable territory. This isn't 1970s economic development anymore. This isn't about attracting and retaining businesses. This is about people now. And to make that transition, to make it more comfortable, get people to realize that this isn't a bunch of fluffy social service type stuff. I really think employers need to help us carry this message because for whatever reason, Extension, Center for Rural Policy, us researchers, we can only take the message so far until folks are like, yeah, whatever, you guys live in the ivory tower. You don't know, what it's like on the ground. This is what it's been like for 50 years. Give me a break. But when employers have something to say, when it's healthcare aligned up with manufacturing, which is lined up with IT, like all these organizations, when they're saying these are the things that we need to do, that we have tons of jobs, that we need people, and that this is going to get bad. And if we don't do this, we will have to leave, close down, expand somewhere else. Then it hits. And particularly with legislators, I mean, we still have legislators that are campaigning on bringing great jobs to your local region, right? And it's like, it's not exactly what we need depending on your region in Minnesota. Really trying to carry that message. So I think that's the biggest key. Number 2, and I think we're seeing this across the board, is that employers are stepping up and wanting to collaborate with our workforce development boards, with DEED, with other organizations about how can we help pitch in, what do we need to do? And the biggest thing we've seen, I remember a story from the Upper Minnesota Valley RDC out in West Central Minnesota. They were working on all this resident recruitment stuff, promoting the area. And their biggest frustration was employers were still putting jobs in the local newspaper, and then they would have somebody show up and they wouldn't talk about what it's like to live there at all, right? They would just talk about, here's the job, look how great this job is, why wouldn't you take it, right? So we still have some employers that I think need to get up to speed on the fact that you are in competition with other regions and other employers that understand this dynamic and are trying a lot harder than you are to get to not only recruit new folks, but retain them as well. So those are a couple things I would say from an employer's perspective, but also preface it with saying, I think there's a lot of employers doing a really great job.
Yeah. And spouses have a pretty good opportunity to veto moving plans or job plans.
Absolutely.
As they should,
Yeah.
right? So it's not just about the employee. and so on and
Yes,
so
it's about the
forth.
household. Exactly. Talk about your school district. Talk about other employment opportunities. Talk about how, you have kids and they can just hang out and play around the block and they're in part of all these organizations, right? Like that's stories we need to tell. We're trying to overcome a pretty robust, long-standing narrative about our rural areas, about what it's like to live there that don't match reality. And so it's going to take quite an effort to overcome that.
That's Yes, thank you. This leads into another question I think I'm going to direct towards Ben. This works okay. So you've talked a lot about involving people with local culture. You've also, at the beginning of our conversation today, you talked about a specific statistic, a survey gauging resident retention and friendly communities or something like that. I think you mentioned. Can you first off repeat that survey, and then number two, talk about what community culture is and why it's important to try to get people involved in that.
Yeah, no, good question. So there's a lot of stats I have. I think one of them is that we ask a question to these newcomer households, like, do you believe the community you moved to is welcoming? And a full-on 78% of newcomer households said the community they moved to is welcoming. And we were kind of afraid to ask that, right? Are we welcoming? But then you break it down by another question, which we asked, which is, do you think that you're going to see yourself living here in 5 years? And we're not going to really follow up like, Dylan, did you really have still here in 5 years? Like, we're not going to follow up, but it kind of gets at how's it going as a newcomer in your town. If you don't believe it's going well, you don't see yourself being there. So here's the breakdown. For those that say the community they moved to is welcoming, 86% are like, I'm going to be here in 5 years. But for those that say the community is not welcoming, we're under 50%. We're at 44%. So this is where retention isn't going to save you anymore. Like, you're doing recruitment wrong on the front end. So let's talk about that. How do we welcome new people in? So number one, I'll say just 1 in 4 newcomer households are returnees. That are people that grew up there, moved away, and came back. I was in McLeod County last night. Ask people at any big event you have, raise your hand if you're currently living in the town that you were born in. And 90% are not living in the town that they were born in. Our communities are constantly made up of these new people moving in. But what are we told? Like, you just need to learn how we do it around here. Like, okay, that's like so when I talk about culture, do you believe that your community has a culture that people need to melt themselves into? Or do you believe that newcomers moving in can contribute to the refreshing of the culture that has constantly been changing? I do not really like the melting pot approach. It washes everybody away. I prefer, and an analogy alternative is a salad. I don't even like that. I kind of like the stew analogy that we're kind of like ladling people in and ladling people out, but the culture is the broth, right? It's like what's in between us and what we create. And we still have semblances of people in that broth from 100 years ago, but it's not much. Our communities are constantly changing. So how do you view these new people as people who are going to be contributing to the vibrancy of your town? I mean, you have kids living in negative narrative households right now who are constantly told there's nothing here for them. Our best days are behind them. So one indicator for success and failure might just be asking your high school kids, do you believe that if you move away, you have a place to move back to? That dictates your narrative. In one community, you got 40% of kids saying they'll move back. In the other community, it's 80 said they're going to come back. 80% of those kids are like, yeah, I know there's a chance for me here, and I'm not a failure when I return. So this is like the narrative dictating almost everything around that. But I would argue, be receptive of where new people are. Do not use the warm body approach to get them into the job or into your like, hey, James, you're new in town. You ready to join the EDA board? You're like, what? I don't know. I guess I'm not even a person that knows anything about that. So get past the warm body approach to really see how these newcomers can contribute. So I like Eric's line about just document. You need to people like go out of their way to get away from commercials. Like all you need to do for newcomers and for people looking to move in is just document everyday life. They want to know. It takes 14 minutes for you to leave work, hook up your boat, and get to the landing and dump it off. Like that's a resident recruitment indicator. So I think there's a whole different set of metrics we could use for some of those that we don't really have well formed out. But for me, it is all about the narrative. And if you believe rural communities are dying, then when people are successful, they're the exception. Rural is not exceptional. We are filled with people doing successful things every day. So I don't like to say we're not exceptional, but we're not exceptional. This is the everyday. We do successful things every day. So thanks, James.
Thanks, Ben. Well, this is great. I like the way this is going. Eric, I'm going to ask you a question in a little bit here. Sorry, my dog's barking here. I'm going to ask you a question in a little bit regarding your idea of simplicity and flooding the zone with good, which you mentioned earlier. But Eric, or excuse me, Adam, as somebody on the ground doing this work, is this expensive? I mean, what does a successful program, what should an employer expect if they're entering into this space?
Yeah, it can certainly feel daunting. It could feel like it'd take a lot of dollars to make any type of recruitment retention program work, workforce development, resident recruitment, so forth. And really, I think a good example is what we're doing with CentraCare. We have over 12,000 employees. We are across 16 to 18 counties in central Minnesota. We serve over 800,000 people, and I have one person on my team who is focused on this, and we've been very successful. And I think just kind of wrap what others have been saying, we always feel like at times that we have to do it ourselves. Find out what local, statewide programs are there. What kind of groups can you partner with? We're partnering with other healthcare organizations. We're partnering with other industries to help with that development. We're not doing it ourselves. And when you get a group together that have the same goal, it's so much easier just to be part of that group, bounce ideas off. Yeah, maybe it might take some additional funding if you're putting on events or programs, but a lot of our work is starting with the school districts, just having a partnership with them, talking with students, get them interested. Again, when we're talking about rural Minnesota or even the metro area, people stay when they see a path forward of where they can go, what they can do. When they're out there and they don't know what to do, what they can do, usually they catch the first thing that's flying at them. So you as an employer, if you're going out there, you're on the ground, you're having those conversations, that's where the cost is. It's the cost in time in creating those partnerships and developing those opportunities for individuals to experience within your own employment opportunities. So the cost is not high. It's about building partnerships, and it's about time commitment. And it's not a set it and forget it type program. You have to always keep on, because the work you do today is not going to pay off tomorrow. In 2 years from now, you're going to be in a much better place. 2 years from there, you're going to be a better place. It's the long game when we're talking about resident recruitment, workforce development, and keeping people here or attracting people.
It's a new paradigm, it sounds like, right? We're gonna have to get different key performance indicators to recognize what success looks like. And that would have been a whole other set of questions we could have asked, just like what success looks like. But we're almost out of time. We're going to pass it on very, very soon here to Della Ludwig, workforce strategy consultant for the Central and the Southwest region, to take over for Unplugged. But Eric, I'd like to ask you the last question. I failed to really discuss that. Kind of, you have a Zen mindset that I really appreciate. You talked about before in conversations that we've had that you need to keep it simple. And you've also mentioned flooding the zone with good. And I think there's kind of an overlap there a little bit. And maybe this would work. You talked about social media being utilized as a simple tool for resident recruiting. And it could kind of talk about what, or kind of relates maybe to what Ben said about documenting everyday life, and also with Ben kind of engaging with students for a path forward, which again relates to that kind of that idea of a simple answer, Occam's razor almost, which I think Della will address during our Unplugged session. But sorry, could you just elaborate a little bit on using social media as an example of simplicity in resident recruiting?
For sure, 100%. And Adam touched on it. Is this expensive, right? Well, if I'm going to document everyday life, I've got this thing in my front pocket every single day, right? Like, we live, whether we like to admit it or not, and it's not just our kids, we live looking at this thing, right? So how do I use this thing to document everyday life? The simplicity, what we call it in the office is intent and effort. Everything that we do, there's an intent behind it, right? If we're going to document something, there's an intent. The effort part, again, you have to have a team of hardworking people, right? Like, they have to want to do the job well. So there is an effort element. It could be sweat equity more than it is actual dollar resources, right? The work that we do is organic. It's when we leverage digital platforms, yes, we have some budgets to try to, again, break through the noise. But what we mostly rely on is organic. We call it free attention. One of our goals is to get as much free attention as we can for Otter Tail County, the Otter Tail County region. And this thing that's in our pocket is an avenue to do that. Right now, you want to have a plan, you want to have a game plan for what this is going to look like. You want to have guardrails, right, of do's and don'ts, rules of the road, all that type of stuff. And that, so you sit down and you think it out. But I heard this, I was at a thing yesterday or Monday, and somebody smarter than me said, let it be authentic first, and then you can decide where to guide it, right? In the olden days, we used to spend a bunch of budget and a bunch of time saying, this is exactly what we're going to do for the next 12 months. Well, the mechanisms that we use, and Adam touched on it too, you have to adapt. It's going to change. The mechanisms we use are going to be different tomorrow than they were yesterday. And we have to be in a position to adapt in order to be able to tell our story in the most efficient way possible. So, but you're right. It is a mindset, right? Like once you change your mindset, then you have permission to start changing other perceptions. But if you're still living in this, woe is us, woe is me, what are we going to do? Rural is dead, rural is dying. We could have been this, we could have had that. If you're still there, ain't nobody else going to pick up on the good stuff. They're just going to hear that self-talk that you're broadcasting, intentionally or not.
Yeah, it's almost a choice, right? I mean, we have more power over our thoughts than we think we do. And it kind of, Ben brought up something before about us, the majority of Minnesotans now commuting out of their county, which is very interesting. I used to work in another state, and I had a 45-minute commute. It was in a big metropolitan area, and that wasn't a big deal at all to me. Like, that was just not a biggie. And if I start looking at a 45-minute radius around my community, even if I'm in a very rural area, there is a ton going on. There is so many opportunities, right? And if something is not going on, I can feel confident that there's at least enough individuals in that space that would be interested in starting something or, making something really cool. So anyway, it's just, again, hitting that switch, I think is a very, very interesting topic. We could talk about this forever. I think, again, we're going to continue to see businesses and private enterprise entering into the space of resident recruiting and, childcare, housing, these spaces that traditionally maybe businesses didn't get involved with, but it's really exciting to see that. And I'm really happy that all four of you are in the kind of the leadership roles to kind of guide us into this new paradigm. But without further ado, I would like to throw it over to Della, who is going to introduce next month's Workforce Wednesday, but also facilitate our Unplugged session. So if you're still with us for the Unplugged session, please feel free to turn on your cameras and turn on your microphones and ask questions directly to our panel. Della, thank you.
Excellent. Thanks, James. And I'm hoping you're controlling the videos and all the PowerPoint presentation as well. So great conversation today. Very interested in this. It definitely is focused on our employers and the information that is given. So again, I'm Della Ludwig. I am Central Minnesota and Southwest Workforce Strategy Consultant. I cover 22 counties in my region. So great to see everybody. Once again, thank you to our panelists for their thoughts and their input on today's presentation. They'll be joining us soon again. We have another 30 minutes of conversation with them, so please stay with us. Before we move on to our Unplugged session, please take a minute to complete the survey on today's Workforce Wednesday. We're always looking for ways to provide relevant content to you and make sure our topics are well worth your while on everything that we're providing to you. We really appreciate all of the feedback that is given. We will also be sending the recording and the resources directly out to you, to everybody that has registered. So I'll be looking for that information yet this week. And then during this webinar, we'll talk about, next month. Next month, what do we have coming up? We have workforce consultation strategies coming to you in June. During this webinar, we'll talk about the workforce consult and the benefits for the employers. You'll hear about Deed's workforce strategy consultations, the process for businesses that we serve, and we'll talk and take a deeper dive into the process for developing workforce strategies. We'll end with a panel discussion of subject matter experts and businesses sharing their experiences on receiving a workforce consultation. And this is something that we do one-on-one, and we can also do this for the employers and communities. So it's a great opportunity to learn more of what we do on a daily basis. Registration is now open, and this event will be held on June 4th. And again, it will be focusing on workforce consultation strategies. The link will be in our chat and is also available on our Workforce Wednesday webpage on careerforcemn.com. You can also go to this webpage to check out our past and upcoming session topics throughout the rest of this year, and our resources, blogs, and ways to engage with our regional workforce strategy consultants. You can also sign up to receive our emails, our reminders, and upcoming events and newsletters. And there's other information available for you as well. On our next slide, you can feel free to reach out to one of your local workforce strategy consultants with any questions that you have. We all now we'll switch over to our unplugged session where we'll stop the recording and you can all unmute your microphones and turn on your cameras, and we'll have an open dialogue and conversation with the panelists and kind of do a deeper dive on the conversation that we've already been having. So thank you and welcome everybody again. So here we go.